Hello, my friends. This is the Grimflayer. I hope you're all doing very well today. We are playing some more Golgari, and we are on the play. First time in a while, it seems, but we have won the die roll. And our hand is sweet. We have what's probably the best turn one play when on the play in a blind matchup, which is Inquisition of Kozilek. We have follow-up interaction. We have two threats, both of which scale well into the late game. If this is a matchup where we need an early clock, we might not be as excited to have both of these late game threats. But if it is such a matchup, then we'll be happy to have two forms of hand disruption, which is probably what we'll have to lean on. So, and we have all three colors of mana, our mana base, and we have a threat out of our mana base. So, yeah, cannot complain about this hand. We will certainly keep it and be happy to do so. Our opponent will also keep 7. So let's take a look at what they're doing. Okay, folks, this is the long-awaited matchup against Spirits. Now, the presence of Mutavault, I'm no expert on the Bant Spirits lists. They could possibly squeeze one or two of them in, I don't know. But the Mutavault pretty much signals straight blue-white to me. I also am a little bit more confident in saying that the Bant lists do not play that many copies of Rattle Chains. I've seen 1. I've seen 2. Again, no expert, so take that with a grain of salt. But Rattle Chains, Mutavault, yeah, this says straight blue-white with Ether Vial to me. That is my read. So they've got a nice balanced hand. It's a lot like ours. They have 3 lands, one of which being a creature land, and 4 good spells. But of course, they're a tribal deck, so they are all creatures. Now, there is an argument for taking literally any of these 4 cards, right? First up, Spell Queller. This is the tempo blowout extraordinaire. This card is going to... so the Spirit deck tries to win the tempo game, and then kill you. Like, they turn the corner surprisingly quickly. That's always been the weakness of the deck. They've always had really good interactions stapled to flying creatures. Like, that's already pretty good. But now with Supreme Phantom, they can turn the corner quickly. Spell Queller is a linchpin of that strategy, because it is a 2-for-1 unless you're able to answer the Queller. This card is kind of, in terms of raw power, never really a bad take. Selfless Spirit also lines up really well against a lot of what our deck is doing. It's also an aggressively costed beater. As are the other two. All of these are 2-power flyers. So, like, they've got, at the 2-drop slot, they've got some really efficient rates in terms of the power and toughness when you take flying and anthems into context. Now, so Selfless Spirit lines up pretty well against our interaction. Rattle Chains as well. I'm a huge fan of this card, Rattle Chains. I think it's completely fantastic. The utility is off the charts. It's a little worse now that we know about it, but still very, very powerful. So both of these cards kind of mess with our interaction in different ways. Finally, we have Remorseful Cleric, which is actually quite a problem for us, potentially. Right now, it's not doing too much against our specific hand, except maybe keeping us off of Tasigur if they use this sacrifice ability aggressively. But obviously very good in the matchup when we're playing Tarmogoyf and Skooz. So which do we take of these 4? It's really kind of a toss-up. A big strength of their deck is being able to play at instant speed. Some creatures have Natural Flash, and they also have Ether Vial. If they had a Vial, my take would probably be different. Maybe I'd take the Vial itself, actually. But since they don't, I'm going to take the Rattle Chains. I think that's going to be the hardest one to play around over the course of the game. Like I said, there's an argument for literally all 4 of those takes, but we took the Rattle Chains. We're going to pass. Sorry I took a little while to resolve that, but that's Like I've said before in videos, often the turn 1 discard decision is the most important decision of the game. So they're going to crack the Flooded Strand for an island. They found a Mausoleum Wanderer off the top. Now, this card, that was a really nice find for them, by the way. Very, very nice to top deck that. The big problem with their hand was it was a little bit slow, otherwise it had everything. Now it's no longer slow. This card is a big part of what puts Spirits on the map. If you compare it to Curse Catcher and Merfolk, this is like a Curse Catcher on steroids. It is amazing. Amazing, amazing in this deck. Definitely not best pleased to see that. We draw Scavenging Ooze. Alright. So we've got basically two reasonable options here. We can kill the Wanderer with Brutality, or we can play a Scavenging Ooze. I don't think it's worth running out the Hissing Quagmire early, because we don't even necessarily want to play our 3-drop on 3 anyway. It's not like we're making sure we cast a Liliana on curve, in which case we might be interested in the Quagmire. So we pretty clearly want to play a 2-drop here. So what are they going to do next turn? Well, could be Selfless Spirit, could be Remorseful Cleric, they could draw something new. I am ambivalent. I thought about it for a while, and I chose the more proactive line of Scavenging Ooze. Now, Mausoleum Wanderer, maybe it's wrong to see it as a lower value target than any of these, just because it costs less. The card is actually quite fantastic, but regardless, we already have a target in the Yard of Rattle Chains, and a 3/3 creature is actually going to be pretty tough for them to deal with just what we know about in their hand. So I like playing the Ooze there, although killing that with Brutality is certainly not bad. They're going to run out the Remorseful Cleric. Makes sense to start threatening the graveyards if Scavenging Ooze threatens to get out of control. And they're going to begin the clock. We'll take the hit for 2, and we're going to draw land. Okay. So we still want to stick to the plan. We still want to not deploy our 3-drop on turn 3 because we want to save that till turn 4 if at all possible. Now, just to get under Spell Queller, there might have been an argument for playing the Tireless Tracker there. That's the one exception. That said, they are a Path to Exile deck. We don't want to get our Tracker pathed before it gets us at least 1 clue. And there is a way to play around the Queller, which you will see next turn. So I'm going to hit the Remorseful Cleric with the Brutality. We're just going to get rid of this while we can. Get it off the table. And play the Hissing Quagmire. Now, there was perhaps an argument for playing the Catacombs first just to gain a life and increase my Scavenging Ooze's power and toughness just beforehand, but my plan is to eventually go off with the Tireless Tracker, in which case we might be able to hold this. My plan is to cast the Tassiger next turn. We want to make sure we can do that while potentially doing both of those things and sequencing efficiently with whatever else we draw. So playing the Quagmire there was a little bit lower value in the moment. It might prove to be the better play long term. There's a lot of little decisions here that really matter against a tempo-oriented deck like our opponent's playing. And frankly, a lot of them have been debatable so far. There have not necessarily been any clear-cut choices, and that's why this matchup can be really tough, that and the raw power level of the deck. So Mausoleum Wanderer comes across just for 1 this time, and then they pass. They've played the Mutavault, pretty obviously holding up Spell Queller. So this is kind of how we wanted them to sequence in a way. We are not going to be able to run out our Tracker on turn 4, unfortunately. But what we are going to be able to do is play out the Tassiger the Golden Fang. That is going to, of course, be a little bit too costly to be hit by the Spell Queller, whose clause is limited to CMC 4 or less. We went ahead and delved away everything. There were 2 choices there. We could have left the Collective Brutality, but you know, this thing's too big to be Brutality'd. This thing can get bigger at instant speed, especially if they get Lords. Brutality just loses its utility into the mid-game as far as being a pure kill spell. So I wanted a clear shot at delving. I wanted to delve the graveyard clear so I have a free shot at getting something really good with Tassiger's ability if we need to. This also allows me to bluff a Fatal Push, which might prove relevant with a Mutavault on the field especially. They're going to end-step path my Skoos, which is interesting, over the Tassiger. With the graveyards empty, Tassiger is quite clearly the bigger threat in the moment, but they seem to be taking the long view. They seem to be anticipating or playing around a flurry of removal from my deck, and they don't want the Ooze to get out of control, so that makes sense. They also have a Moorland Haunt that they deploy, so they don't want the Skoos fighting over their creatures, because this is actually an amazing, amazing card for them in this matchup specifically. They're going to run out the Selfless Spirit, so they're going shields down. Spell Queller is no longer live for the moment. They realize that with a Tassiger down, they need to become proactive. They need to just play to the board and race me. Unfortunately, I did not have a Fatal Push to cast. I was just bluffing one. Would have been pretty nice there. Even if they sack in response, either one of these, that's totally fine. We just kind of want to stay ahead on board at this point. We draw Scavenging Ooze, which is okay. That's not terribly exciting. Would much rather have a kill spell here, or perhaps even a Tarmogoyf, although that might not be correct. We need the kill spell first, then the Tarmogoyf. That would be pretty cool. But regardless, we get to resolve the tracker while they are unable to quell it. We get to get our clue, and we just get to dump out our hand. Now, even though the Ooze, like I said, is a little average at the moment, that was still a great, great turn. So our board is all of a sudden pretty huge. We have gas in the form of this clue, and any top deck is now gas. That's the beautiful thing about Tireless Tracker when you have a ton of land. Any top deck is now gas. Opponent will deploy a Seachrome Coast that enters the battlefield tapped, and they find a Supreme Phantom. Alright, so the Queller is still kind of dead in hand for now, but that was a good find for them. Their decision to become proactive last turn has been rewarded by that top deck. It means their clock is a lot more frightening now. There is nothing we can do about this attack. We're going to go down to 8. They have a Mutavault up as a blocker, or as an attacker next turn. So, Thoughtseize, ooh, this is a tilting draw, and I will explain why. So, firing this off, taking away the Queller, that seems pretty good, right? Well, that leaves us dead to exactly 6 points of damage in the air. Nothing we can do about it, because we're going to lose 2 life to play the Thoughtseize. Now, if this was Inquisition, that would be another story. That would be really nice. We could leave back a blocker for the Mutavault, and we could get aggressive. Unfortunately, so unless we find a kill spell first, Thoughtseize is a pretty dead card. So, pretty clearly, we need to start out by cracking this clue. In search of a kill spell, we find a land. Especially that it enters a battlefield tap, that's not very good, but it at least gives us a redraw. And we find a Tarmogoyf. Okay. Not particularly exciting. If they play the Spell Queller next turn simply to pump the Mausoleum Wanderer, they will be swinging at us for 7. So as long as we leave a blocker back for the Mutavault, we're going to be fine. That said, there's also no reason to attack with a Scavenging Ooze, because it's just going to get chumped by the Phantom, or indeed they'll fire up the Mutavault and block it if they are not afraid of Fatal Push. So, just to play around Path to Exile, and for the reasons I just listed, we will only send in 2 attackers, our 2 biggest ones. We're going to put them to 4, and then, yeah, we just play the Tarmogoyf. And right now we're not dead. Let's see what they do. They found a Mausoleum Wanderer. Alright, so we were not dead to Path to Exile. We were not dead to another 3-drop Spirit, like another Spell Queller. But we are dead to the Spell Queller plus another spirit that they can cast, which would have to have been 1 or 2 drop. Pretty rough here. So they get to swing in, all flying for exactly lethal, and we had them pretty well outclassed on board, considering the hissing quagmires and, you know, the power of any top deck being gas, like I said with Tracker. That said, we just drew too many threats and not enough interaction. Turn 1 discard was good. Then the Brutality on turn 3 was fine, but we didn't draw the interaction after that. We were just too threat dense, and don't get me wrong, these threats ended up being great, but these other threats were pretty extraneous to our game plan. They cannot even chump block against an entire tribe that flies. So we needed to find a couple of removal spells in there, or we needed this to be an Inquisition, something. We just needed a little bit more help from our interaction. We did not get it. It was really close. Now, looking back, hey, you know, you can say that I misplayed. I don't think I made any egregious misplays. I don't think I made any decision that was blatantly wrong. But if I had, on turn 2, Brutality'd the Mausoleum Wanderer instead of playing the first Scavenging Ooze out, well, maybe this would have been a whole different game. This thing got in for 2, then it got in for 1, and then it ended up getting in as a 4/4 right at the end. Maybe I should have respected their clock a little bit more. That said, if they hadn't top decked a Supreme Phantom, we would have been a lot better off. We could have played around the Spell Queller really well once we got the Tracker underneath it, because we can still be proactive, still crack clues, and not run anything out into the Queller. Eventually they would have had to flash it in just as a combat trick or as a chump blocker, and then we're free up to play spells again. So I don't think my line was incorrect per se. That said, had I taken a different one, we might have won this game. I still think we were really, really close, and perhaps a little bit unlucky to lose it. Again, just failing to find relevant interaction over several draws. So that said, Spirits is a really tough deck, and they get you like this a lot. They get you like this just exactly for lethal. Really close, cagey games, and hey, what can you do? So let's go to the sideboard, see what we're going to do to get these spooky ghosts off our back and try to win games 2 and 3. Okay, my friends, we are here deciding how to sideboard against blue-white spirits. We didn't see Aether Vial, but we also didn't see any green lands, nor collected companies, nor noble hierarchs. So we are definitely against the straight blue-white version. And what do we want to do? All right, so first up, let's look at this Engineered Explosives. It is generally anything that kills things is going to be at least worth considering against a tribal deck. That is just a nice rule of thumb. And I like EE here. They cluster around the 2-drop a fair amount. Of course, so do we in terms of our permanents, but as always, we can sequence to minimize the friendly fire from this. But I'm also interested in it on 1. As you saw in Game 1, Mausoleum Wanderer is a big problem. Even playing this on 1 and forcing them to kind of scale back their crazy tempo advantage plays, and or sneaking in a piece of removal under Spell Queller is reasonable, especially because it can also hit Aether Vial. Now, I do not know whether Vials will still be in post-side, and it is also worth noting that if they're on the Bant version with Noble Hierarch and Aether Vial, Explosives is even more of a definite. But I still like it. If it's a really weird game where they're just going to town with Moorland Haunt, it can also answer a bunch of the tokens. So I think Explosives is fine. Speaking of Moorland Haunt, Nihil Spellbomb does compete on that axis, but we're not interested. That's just too cute. Doesn't really do anything else that I'm aware of. We'll put it over here with Fulminator Mage and the cards we don't want. Fulminator, not the match for you. Maelstrom Pulse, this is just great. They play a lot of 4-ofs. This is going to get around that really, really well. Definitely just want to bring this in. Golgari Charm is a little more questionable. They do play a lot of X1s, let's get that straight. They play Selfless Spirit, Rattle Chains, Mausoleum Wanderer, blanking on the name, the Remorseful Cleric, that's the one. Ton of X1s, and a lot of them are 2 mana X1s. So, and this is a minus, not a damage, so it, not a damage source, so it's going to get around the Selfless Spirit sacrifice ability. That is all good. That said, regen is almost completely dead. They're not playing any removal spells or destroy spells. They're all exile. And blocking is almost non-existent in this matchup. They're too small to block our attackers, and we don't fly. That's generally how it goes. So, and destroy target enchantment, I don't know. They probably have a worship in their sideboard, but I doubt it comes in against us. So the -1/-1 mode is still potentially really good, but again, a single Lord makes this fairly dead. So I'm going to put this in the maybe board, and I'll kind of explain why at the end. Whereas other matchups where all of the above is still true, I would bring it in. Choke is a maybe board card. I would probably side conservatively game 2 until I know whether or not they have Ether Vials still in. Choke is a lot more appealing if I think or know that they've sided out all of their vials. And strangely, I would need to look at some exact deck lists to get the exact numbers, but the blue-white lists might actually play fewer islands than the Bant lists, or are likely to have fewer islands in play, because of course Bant is always fetching the dual lands. And blue-white is going to play probably a full force Sea-Chrome Coast, among other things, so I don't know how good Choke is. It's going to be maybe until we see more. Nissa Vital Force, like I said in previous videos, if they are not actively destroying our permanents, even though the matchup can get grindy, I don't really want her. Bailoff, we don't bring it in for the same reason against Merfolk. The same reason we don't bring it in against Merfolk, excuse me. The life gain's okay, but it's not a reliable blocker against their evasion, and it's a little clunky when it's not able to block. So, no to that. No to Surgical, of course. This is the opposite of the matchup where Surgical shines. No to Duress because it's a creature deck. Collective Brutality is a maybe. I mentioned in Game 1 how, as a pure removal spell, it can get outclassed a little bit easily. The life gain's okay. The removal mode is okay. Yeah, the removal mode is actually better than okay. Again, when I think of all their X1s, that can still die even with a 1 Lord in play. The discard mode is okay. I don't care that much about the instants and sorceries they might be packing, frankly. This stuff is all a lot better, but even this is Kalidas. Let's start here. He pretty much just is a for sure inclusion in against any other tribal deck that I've featured on this channel. So why do I have him over here in the nose? Well, I will tell you why. So Kalidas is a clunky card. You need to hit 4 mana, and even hitting 4 on curve if you have all 4 lands. Sometimes our 4th land's a tap land, so he's a little clunky. He's especially clunky because you need to untap with him and then start killing things for him to be worth it. Now, against most tribal decks, his upside is so stratospherically high that it's worth all of those downsides because he will start getting out of control with lifelink. He's a very good blocker, at least the turn you deploy him before you get to untap. And then he creates an army of zombies, which are very good blockers or attackers if the board is clear. All of that about blocking does not apply to this matchup. Once again, their evasion is changing the way we want to play against them. So, without that major upside of Kalidas being a big life-linking blocker who then creates a string of chump blockers, I don't think he's worth it. I do not believe he's worth it here. That is my perspective on the matchup. Feel free to disagree. The Wrath effects, however, we are very interested in. Damnation is obviously, Worth it, even though it's symmetrical in a matchup like this. For sure we want it. Languish, again, as usual, frankly, is even better than Damnation, because it's less likely to be symmetrical, and it also gets around the Selfless Spirit activation. So Languish is just amazing. Let's bring these 3 over here for consideration, and then bring these 4 in. So, for the reasons that I just explained in relation to Kalidas, we are not going to get as aggressive with some of our sideboard cards. The inverse of that, the kind of complementary factor to that, is the fact that unlike against a lot of other tribal decks, we actually want to keep access to a certain number of discard spells. Couple reasons for that. So let's compare spirits to merfolk. Alright, so in my merfolk video I said I'm comfortable cutting all of the discard, even though it can be pretty good against them still. I'm comfortable cutting all of it because they can dump out their hand in response to a mid-game discard spell. They can flash in creatures, they can vial in creatures. That's all pretty good, and we just want threats and answers off the top of our deck. We don't want anything that can whiff. Doesn't that same concept apply to the Spirits matchup? Well, it does, but it is more important to spot check the Spirits hand simply because of the thorn in our side known as Spell Queller. We have a lot of ways to kill a resolved Spell Queller, but it is still very good. A surprising amount of the time we cannot actually deal with a resolved one, and it's just going to 2-for-1 us while they race us to victory. We don't want to leave ourselves entirely cold to that, and we are interested in keeping our mana curve lower. So I don't want to bring in the big top-end stuff. We really, truly cannot afford to get behind in this matchup. So normally you might see me against other decks bring in the Cletus, bring in all of the removal, and maybe side out an Assassin's Trophy because it's less efficient and get rid of all the discard. We're not going to do that here. We're going to keep all 4 trophies. We don't care about ramping them. We just have to have guaranteed answers when we need them. Instant speed is huge in this matchup, and a catch-all permanent against their stuff that can surprisingly, outgrow the Collective Brutality, for example. Very, very good. So we want all 4 trophy, and we want some number of discard. Now, if they're on the Collected Company version, or if you for some reason maybe know that they have a worship, which I think is bad against us, or any other permanents that are above CMC3, or not just permanent spells in general, then you might want to do a split here. But with our life total being highly relevant, I'm just going to cut all of the Thoughtseizes. Pretty clearly happy to just cut all of them. Now, what else can we cut here? You could trim away an Inquisition as well. I'm happy with 2 to 3 of these. So the Inquisition could go, and this honestly looks really good to me. That said, if you wanted to keep the 3rd Inquisition in, and or you wanted to make room for some of this other stuff, Liliana's very good in the matchup, but it's not necessarily always easy to cleanly edict something against a deck with Ether Vial and lots of flash creatures, right? So you could trim away a Liliana. You could maybe even go down a Brutality. I don't know how valid that is, but I think it's clearly one of the weaker options compared to all this other stuff, and we don't really want to cut down on our threat count. So the final cut would be either Liliana or Inquisition for Game 2. This is how I would treat this matchup. And then for Game 3, after you know more about whether they have Ether Vials in and therefore how good Choke is, maybe you want to revisit ideas like the Golgari Charm, then we can come back to the drawing board for Game 3. But sideboard's going to look something like that. It's a lot more conservative than the big pile of 8 cards that I usually bring in against creature matchups. Now you might think, well, doesn't that mean that you've got more cards that are good against elves and merfolk and allies, to name a few that I've featured on this channel, than a tier 1 deck like Spirits? I would say no. I would say that means that our main deck is really well configured against Spirits, and we are respecting the fact that we just need our cleanest catch-all, guaranteed to work answers in this matchup. Hello, my friends. We are back here for Game 2 against Blue-White Spirits. Having lost Game 1, very close game, we are on the play, and our hand is sweet. We don't have a turn 1 discard spell or other piece of interaction, which is a little unfortunate. Besides that, we can't really complain. Liliana's looking very, very good on the play here. And Brutality, like I said, it does not scale that well into the late game against their deck, so we're very happy to see it in the opening hand where it's going to probably be just fine. We're also a little unhappy to not have for example, a Hissing Quagmire to run out here on turn 1, but we get to bluff Fatal Push if that matters, and you can't complain about your functional land base, right? So we draw another Liliana. That could prove to be quite good, actually. We'll see. For now, we just have to run out the 0/1 Tarmogoyf. Not particularly threatening, but it will certainly grow. Like I said in the sideboard tech, I do not care that much about the instants and sorceries they're packing. Truly don't. We really need to answer the creatures above all. So running that out on turn 2, not very good. Definitely just want to play our threat, even though it is very underwhelming at the moment. They've got a Ghost Quarter. Will they, won't they? They will. Alright, Remorseful Cleric, sure. I'm very happy that they just played anything here. Literally any creature I'm happy to resolve a Liliana, edict it away. And look at that. Now our Goyf is big. Now he's getting in for one. Take that. Opponent's going to play a Hallowed Fountain. Tapped. Okay. So we're not dancing around the Spell Queller for the moment. And to be fair, Liliana pressures them, her +1, pressures them pretty hard against playing the draw go style. At least while their hand is still pretty full like this. They have to run out a Supreme Phantom. So that kind of probably feels bad for them, but it also feels bad for us right now because our Brutality cannot cleanly kill it. However, that Abrupt Decay can. That was a pretty nice draw. Definitely not upset about that one. We're going to Conceal Information, take the Liliana up, and even though this is pitching a kill spell here, this second Liliana is another kill spell for all intents and purposes. It looks like the type of game where we're going to be able to resolve her if we need to. So, pitching the Brutality seems just fine here. I'm not comfortable pitching away our 4th land quite yet. Tasigur is going to be pretty sweet here. And now we got some other card types in the yard too, so that was pretty nice. Tarmogoyf is starting to become a respectable cluck. And our Field of Ruin is pretty awkward here, not gonna lie. But we're gonna hang on to that for the usual reasons. Maybe it will be good Liliana fodder if we draw another land, Tireless Tracker, all that good stuff. They play a Selfless Spirit, and they'll pass. Alright, so they are in kind of the nightmare scenario of having to just run threats out one at a time against a Liliana. That is definitely not good for them. Their big window to break through that would have been if I could not kill the Supreme Phantom last turn. Thankfully, Abrupt Decay came to our rescue. So I'm very happy to just cash in the Liliana here. She was a really, really nice value, represented by what's often the very best sequence against a creature deck, which is play her, edict to empty the board, tick her up to get a card out of their hand, and then edict again. That's such value, it's incredible. Our Goyf is a 4/5, but it has now been pathed. That is alright. So we could play the Liliana here, and then we'd be ticking her up and running them out of a card in hand, which seems pretty good. They don't seem like they have another land in hand, so we'd be taking away gas. That said, both of our remaining cards are pretty fantastic. Fatal Push is great, and Tasigur is great. We need another threat now that they've dealt with the Goyf. So I think the line here is pretty clearly to play Tasigur. If they have a Queller and they want to try to be cagey around the Liliana, or hold it up so we can't play the Liliana, well, we might be able to find a Revolt trigger from somewhere, or we might be able to just keep pressuring them with a Tasigur so they can't do that. Either way, we're delving away lots of stuff. We're leaving a Planeswalker type in the yard just because we want our Goyfs to be good. They might be holding up Queller, so they're going to pass. Land is actually a pretty fine draw here. So, first and foremost, we need to just get in with our 4-5, see what they're going to do. They don't have another path. So we're going to play out that land, and now, like I said, maybe we'll find a Revolt trigger from somewhere. Well, we've got one waiting in the wings with Verdant Catacombs, so we can play the Liliana. And sure enough, there's Spell Queller, so this feels so good. It doesn't just feel so good, it is so good. We get to fetch for our Revolt trigger, we even get to do it as painlessly as possible. We get to take out the Queller, we get to get our Lily back, and now she gets to tick up for a non-symmetrical discard effect. Like I said, the fact that they haven't played any more lands means they've got more gas in hand. This is going to be a good hit here. Yep, it's a Supreme Phantom. Feels pretty good. Opponent will untap. Pithing Needle. Okay. Not a card that was really on my radar. Not a card that I think is necessarily great against us, because we don't have any one activated ability that necessarily runs away with the game. Now, don't get me wrong, Liliana's been spectacular here, but by definition, if they're picking the right one, they've already seen it. And unless they're playing like a Vendilion Click or something, it means we've already gotten one activation out of it at the minimum. And again, it's not like we only have one really powerful activated ability in the deck. We have Liliana the Last Hope. We even have Tasigur, we have Scavenging Ooze, we've got our utility lands, so I don't know how good Pithing Needle is overall. However, it does seem pretty darn good there, especially when they follow it up with the Phantasmal Image on our Tasigur. Now, that is a brick wall if I've ever seen one. Alright, this could get awkward. We're drawing a land that is pretty awkward. Definitely not accomplishing much with that. So let's begin by activating Tasigur. Seeing what we get. So we mill over an Unwanted Field of Ruin, that's nice. We put a Scooz in the yard as well. Of course they're going to give us the Lily because it does nothing right now. And we're pretty happy to play out our land there, even though in some ways we'd like to hold it. Just so we can get a Field of Ruin activation if we need one, or if we want one. They find a Drogskull Captain off the top. That's pretty good. Of course, they don't have any other spirits right now, but definitely not a bad one at all. They're going to attack with the Tasigur. Now, I can only assume they're trying to bluff, here's an Anthem effect, you better not block me because you'll die. Not quite how that works, but points for the effort, for sure. So, the Tasigurs will duel to a draw. And I am going to fire off this Field of Ruin, taking care of the Ghost Quarter. And the reason I'll do that is just in case we draw a manland. We want to take away their kill spell for the manland, basically. Aha, Maelstrom Pulse is a fantastic draw. Don't get too excited here, though, and just fire this off against a creature, because what we actually want to do is pulse away that Pithing Needle. God, I love the catch-all answers in this deck. I love how many ways we can destroy any type of permanent. Just sincerely my favorite thing about this deck, just about. Because now we get to cash in the Lily for an Edict, and our opponent will just scoop it up then and there. They're just too far behind. Even if we have just another land in hand, we have the Tasigur, who's going to return something very good. All of these are very, very good right now. So most likely we'll be buying back some other stuff. Of course, right there we would have just played the other Lily, Edicted again, and gotten in for 4, and just really put them on the ropes. But our opponent didn't even make us show them the second Lily, they just scooped it up there. Rightfully so, in my opinion. Anyway, good game. Good game. We definitely can credit Liliana for that victory, and the fact that our opponent kind of had no choice with their cards in hand to play things one at a time into the Lily. So this is why I'm not sure about whether Aether Vial stays in or comes out against us, because Aether Vial is very bad in one sense against attrition decks like ours, in that it doesn't play to the board at all. It's basically a mana accelerant is how you should look at it. And it sometimes grants things flash that don't otherwise have flash. That's, of course, all very good. The card is a staple in every format that it's legal. But it is a very bad top deck against a deck that's killing all your stuff and trying to grind you out of resources. So, do the Vials stay or do they go? Well, an argument for them staying is this game. Especially when they're on the draw, they just had no choice but to run things out one at a time into the loving arms of Liliana, where they promptly met their demise. So, very nice there from the Lily. Tasigur offering the threat that makes the game basically inevitable. So, let's go to Game 3. We're going to be on the draw. It's going to be a bit harder, I think, but I think we can do it. Alright, everybody, we are here for Game 3 on the draw, and our hand is a little weird. Languish is one of the best cards in the match. Don't get me wrong, this is one card that we really, truly want to see. And we have the 4 lands to cast it. We have a lot of utility out of our lands. We can sequence pretty painlessly. That is all good. Here's the big problem. We don't have any interaction. We have threats, which of course are non-bows with the Languish. The Skoos will never get big enough to outgrow the Languish unless we draw more interaction. So the hand is pretty awkward. That said, I think because we're on the draw, we want to keep this. If we draw interaction, the Languish becomes very, very good. Or the Scavenging Ooze becomes very, very good. And this is still a pretty good trump card if we are just kind of not doing much and they just play out to the board and try to race us. So I don't think we can realistically mulligan this hand, but it is glaringly absent the interaction that we wish to see. Our opponent also mulliganed to 6. I knew that before I made my decision being on the draw. That also influenced it, because I'm like, alright, I'm less likely to just get curved out on, where they can, realistically play a lot at instant speed. We're kind of dirtling around, not doing much, and then they overwhelm us on one turn before Languish is good. Or they're able to pressure us while holding up Spell Queller for Languish. The fact that they took a mulligan means they're less likely to have that type of nut draw, which also makes me more comfortable keeping this hand. Now we're going to draw a Tireless Tracker, so my decision is looking a little bit worse, because we still lack interaction, and we still have the non-bow of these threats with a Languish. They did not crack the fetch, which leads me to believe they might be on a little bit of a land light hand. Or maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe they just know they're going to get a basic, so it doesn't really matter when they do it. We draw yet another threat now. This is looking pretty poor. Pretty poor. These Skoozes are now the definition of expendable. If everything goes well, they're going to die to our Languish. Like, that's the best case scenario. So we obviously just run this one out without fear of any kind of, counter magic or whatever. Like, we just have to play a card. We just have to play a card. Our hand is looking so clunky. On our end step, they're going to flash in the Rattle Chains. In a way, it feels good when they do that, because it means they haven't blown us out with its ETB trigger in response to a removal spell. That said, not like we've got any removal spells anyway, so the fact that they are being proactive could be good for us, could be bad for us. We will have to see how it plays out. But they have drawn First Blood, and they don't have a third land, so I guess my read about them not cracking the fetch early was correct. They are a little land light. We will begin by attacking with a Scavenging Ooze. We drew a land. That's pretty bad. We really, really want to draw interaction. But, hey, what can you do? Let's just play another Scooze. Despite the fact that we do have a decent amount of late-game value in hand, I still don't want to run the tracker out on curve into a Path to Exile. Not interested in that. Again, I consider these Scoos as pretty expendable at this point, so we're just going to play to the board and see if our Grizzly Bears can kind of pressure them into doing something. Well, they were already pretty starved of food from the yard. They're going to be even more starved now that this thing's around. And yeah, looks like our opponent is definitely playing to the board here, and they've got their own Grizzly Bears basically coming back at us. Only their bears fly. That's not fair. They have found a third land, and they are representing Spell Queller. So let's see if they're interested in trying to flash in the Queller if they have one for a potentially profitable block here. They're not. Okay, so that was our attempt to bait out a Queller. It didn't work. Here's our better attempt to bait one out. It's going to be a Tireless Tracker, and I'll tell you why. So I just said I don't want to run the tracker out and do a path next turn. I consider him valuable enough to not wish to do that. So why am I running him out and do a Queller? Well, we need to force them to make plays now, and this is why. With this Rattle Chains around, they can just do everything on their end step. Whatever they have, they can flash it in on the end step, and we are just simply not going to win this race because we have not drawn any interaction. The Tarmogoyf is a 1-2. The Tassiger can't even be cast. These cards are pretty dead right now, so even though we might be walking this into a Queller, we don't have any other choice. We're not going to win playing Drago, that is for sure. Yep, there's a Queller. Well, that's the risk of doing business, and they're looking like they're in a pretty commanding position right now. They get to crack in for 6. And they get to pass, potentially holding up another Queller, which of course would be very, very bad for our Languish. So, because our life total is very relevant, and also to thin out our deck a tad, I'm certainly going to fetch here on the end step. And we need some good interaction here, and we got it. Inquisition of Kozilek coming through in the clutch. This was the exact draw we needed to see. Even Fatal Push would not have been as good, because we don't have a Revolt trigger right now for the Fatal Push. Yeah. Definitely just about our best draw. So now we get to spot check their hand for a Spell Queller. They're doing something in response. They're going to flash in a Selfless Spirit. Alright. Well, so far so good. That definitely doesn't do anything that we care about. Even better, they're going to spend a card to path away our Scavenging Ooze, which was going to die to this Languish anyway. This just gets better and better for us. And yeah, again, because they've been a little choked on land, we knew they had more gas in hand. They have a Cleric and a Phantom. Pretty clearly take the Phantom there. We should be able to close out the game through a little bit of sacrifice-triggered Grave Hate, that is for sure. So we're feeling great about that sequence. That Inquisition draw just flipped this game completely on its head, and that is why I said in the sideboard tech we need to retain access to some number of discard spells. That is for sure. That was the best possible example of why. This just made everything go so much more in our favor. We're even going to get to crack in for 2 here. This probably gives them a little bit of a sinking feeling, like, you know, oh, maybe there's a Wrath coming. Although maybe not, because they all fly anyway, not like I can block, but normally that would be the case, but they can't do anything about it anyway. They probably think they might be pretty well protected by the Selfless Spirit, but Languish, this card, I cannot say enough good things about. Languish is just gonna sweep them up. He's going to try to give them indestructible. He will, in fact, succeed at giving them indestructible, but that does not help you against -4/-4. And on top of all that, which proved to be just... So what? We killed 3 things. So that's a 3-for-1. We even can call it a 4-for-1 because they pathed our scavenging ooze that was going to die anyway. We can even call that a 5-for-1 because we got a land off the scoos, plus we got our tireless tracker back at the end of it. Yeah, safe to say that was a pretty amazing play. And Inquisition of Kozilek, hey, that started it off and cleared the way for our Languish, made it safe, all that good stuff. Now, they were not sitting on a Queller, so Languish would have taken care of some of the board anyway, but they played way more into the Languish than they would otherwise have, thanks to that Inquisition. And if they had indeed had a Spell Queller, we would have gotten that out of the way as well. So, we're pretty far ahead. That said, we still have to close out this game intelligently, because we are down to 7, and they do get big quickly, and we can never block any of them. So... we get to lead off by creating a clue. God, I love the tireless tracker. Just sincerely love it. So we're on the dig looking for interaction. We still have the problem of all the threats and none of the interaction. That's been the prevailing theme of this game 3. And look, it continues. There's Scavenging Ooze. Not very exciting, but let's crack in with a tracker. Their life total is not particularly high either. It's going to be 7 all. And now we're going to get our big Tasigur down. Pretty happy to delve all that away besides the Scavenging Ooze. And that is because we are going to play our own Scavenging Ooze as a follow-up. Now, if we wanted to be really safe, we could have just played the Scoos and... plan to gobble up a bunch of stuff, but, competing with the Remorseful Cleric for that, I think it's better to just play the Tasigur. As long as our Scoos can get 1 activation and we are now threatening lethal with any 2 attackers, and hey, that was good enough, they just scoop it up. So, 3 intense games, and we got there against Spirits. Game 1, I think, sequenced pretty well around the known quantity of Spell Queller in the hand by, playing the Tasigur, forcing them to play to the board more directly, which in turn allowed us to resolve the Tireless Tracker, which in turn allowed us to get ahead on value. That said, Game 1, we failed to find relevant interaction. We got punished when our draw was a Thoughtseize, when an Inquisition would have been castable there. Thoughtseize proved to be not castable, and they found a Mausoleum Wanderer off the top to get us for exactly lethal. So that was a bit rough, but that's how you lose to Spirits a lot of the time. Game 2, we ended up just riding Liliana of the Veil to victory. She was just incredible. Our plethora of catch-all answers made sure we took care of the Pithing Needle and kept the Liliana train going, and then some big beaters plus the Liliana value was just too much for our opponent to handle, and they scooped it up. And here in Game 3, we had a really awkward progression that culminated in Inquisition into Languish being an absolute and utter blowout in our favor that turned a very grim-looking game into a clean, strong win. So, those were 3 really fun matches. Our opponent played very well. Props to them. And, I'm a big fan of Spirits, and I think I might like the blue-white version a little bit better than the Collected Company version. I don't know yet. Just my amateur opinion. But I'm never entirely comfortable with decks that have Ether Vial and Coco coexisting, which a lot of the Bant variants do now. It just feels like too much wasted value to me. The the cards make each other worse, right? So with Ether Vial, you want to play the highest density of creatures possible. Of course, Collected Company wants the same thing. Both, the existence of one card makes the other worse in terms of Ether Vial being a terrible hit off Coco, and Coco not being able to leverage the power of Ether Vial in any meaningful way. Plus the fact that they're packing some number of Path to Exile main deck alongside all that. I just don't know. I think it might be better to stay streamlined, to either get all in on Bant and try to leverage the sheer power and value of Collected Company, or to have a really nice clean mana base with a 2-color deck like we do here with Golgari, play a lot of utility lands, and play a slightly more tempo-oriented game with Ether Vial. That said, either way, no matter how you build them, Spirits are a Tier 1 deck. We got there against them. We took a little bit more of a conservative sideboard plan to this match, and I think it worked in our favor. That said, Languish pretty much single-handedly won us the game. It has a tendency to do that. I really wouldn't mind trying to squeeze a second one in my sideboard. Next time I update the deck and make some tweaks to it, maybe I will be looking to do that. But, regardless, I hope you enjoyed this match. Thank you, as always, so much for watching. I really appreciate your feedback. This is fun. This is a fun little hobby, and your feedback is cherry on top. So, thank you so much yet again, and I hope you all have a great day. I will see you for the next one.